Hello. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. This day we are going to be looking at guide to writing a convincing research project. Guide to writing a convincing research project. So, research project is one thing that a lot of people actually have issues with. I'm talking about students, researchers, academicians and scholars. Okay. One of the issues or one of the problems that a lot of people actually come across with is, you know, what, what is the proper guide for writing a research project. We must understand that project or research project is divided into six compartments. Okay, six compartments. Now we have the preliminary parts, you know, then we have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, as well as the appendix. So I'm going to be looking at I'm going to be looking at you know I'm going to be dissecting each compartment of a research project. So um so let's look at it like this. Number one is the preliminary pages or the preliminary sections. Now the preliminary section is divided into the first part of it is title page. you know Title page. What is this title page? Title page is actually the first page of a research project. The title page contains the name of the institution, the title of the research, the name of the author, the reason for the research, you know and of course then the date is also added down. So those are the things. Now you can start with on top of the research. On top of that page is the title of the research work. Directly below is the name of the author, the name and the registration number, as the case may be. Then after that, you have impartial fulfillment of the course requirement required for the award of either BSc, you know, MSc, PhD, and stuff like that. Okay, then the date will now come under. That is the first page. Then the second page is the approval page. The approval page contains the name of the institution. You understand? It contains the name of the institution, you know, uh, and department. Then a statement signifying approval for the work by the supervisor, head of department, external supervisor. Space is reserved for their signatures of all listed parties as well. So all the listed parties, space will be given for them, okay, for them to actually sign. Then the next page is the dedication page. Dedication page, the dedication page is actually where the researcher dedicates the research to either a deity or someone dead or alive. you know Now it is actually different from acknowledgement. You understand? Dedication is where you actually dedicate that page to a particular person, either God or a deity or anybody, either living or dead. Then the next one is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is actually where the researcher writes to appreciate all that contributed to the success of the research. So it is actually very important that the researcher does the acknowledgements. Then we also have the table of contents. The table of contents, of course, it has to, it has to be made up of the main headings and subheadings, including page numbers. Page numbers have to be listed. Okay, so now this will allow for easy page identification and reference. So if you need to actually make reference to a particular page, and all of that, it is under the table of content that you quickly go and get such kind of information. Then the last thing under the second to the last thing is the abstract. Abstract is just like a synopsis of the research. Now it is written, it is written in past tense, and it is usually between 100 to 250 pages. 100 to 250 pages, summarizing the problem. That's the statement of the problem, methodology, findings, conclusions, recommendations. Don't forget that you need to also have your theoretical framework, inside the abstract as well. So the last thing is list of tables, figures, symbols. This one too is actually very important under the preliminary pages. Okay, then the next thing is, of course, chapter 1. Now, don't forget that we are done with the preliminary pages. The next one we are looking at now is the body of the research project. So the chapter 1, the topic of chapter 1 is introduction. Okay, the topic of chapter 1 is introduction. That will be written in bold. It will be written boldly in capital letters and centralized as well. Now, directly under it, you have 1.1. 1.1 is the background to the study. Background to the study. Now, before embarking on any research, there's usually a problem. Your ability to recount the problem in a concise and detailed manner is important. Okay, so those are the things. Now, background to the study is talking about the historicity of the research work or of the research problem. You understand? You need to start with a little introduction on your major keywords. Okay, you need to give a concise and historical background of the problem under study. You need to make reference to the authors, and if possible, bring in a little empirical study centering around the identified problems for the study and the background to the study. You also talk about the time to write on the background of the organization of the area. It doesn't have to be too lengthy, but it has to be written in, so it has to be written in a very standard way. Okay, most times not exceeding 2.5 pages. Okay, so that is for 1.1, background to the study. 1.2 is statement of the problem. Now, your ability to formulate a good background of the study will enable you to write a good statement of the problem. Now, a statement of the problem is a summary of the background of the study, while the background of the study talk more about the problem on a wider, detailed perspective. So the statement of the problem is a brief summary of the problem. A good statement of the problem must be concise, factual, and relates with background of the study. So it should be brief enough to state the problem in a single line, then supported by previous research, both empirical and theoretical. So these things are very important. Then the next one is objectives of the study. Objectives of the study must be written in two. That is, they must be written, as broad objective and specific objective. The broad objective is the generic objective of the work, while the specific objectives can be broken down into 4, 5, as the case may be. Okay, after that, you now have the research questions. Now, research questions are written in line with the objective of the study, okay, with the specific objective. So, if your objectives of the study are 4, your research questions should be 4 as well. Then we have research hypothesis or propositions. Let me be quick to be very, concise here, that if your research is a quantitative research, then you have to go with hypothesis. But if it is a qualitative research, then you go with propositions. And these hypotheses or propositions must be written in line with the research questions, and they must be 4. Okay, so the next one is significance of the study. Significance of the study is 1.6. Now there are 3 significance. Okay, generally we have the academic significance, or what some people refer to as theoretical significance, then empirical significance, what some people refer to as societal significance, as well as the last one, which is policy significance. Okay, that is 1.6. Then 1.7 is scope of the study. Scope of the study. Now, the scope of the study should take into cognizance the thesis of the work, as well as the periodization. Okay, as much as that is done, okay, the location of the study has to be written under the scope of the study as well. Then after that, we have 1.9, which is 1.8, which is definition of terms. The key terms in the research work has to be brought out, or have to be brought out, and then clearly explained. Then we have organization of chapters, or organization of the study. Now this one is to really bring out what, in a summary form, what each chapter will contain. So basically, a quick recap is that under chapter 1 is written in capital letter, boldly and centralized. Under it, you have introduction. After introduction, you have 1.1, background to the study. 1.2, statement of the problem. 1.3, research questions. 1.4, objectives of the study. 1.5, significance. 1.5 is research hypothesis or propositions. 1.6, significance of the study. 1.7, scope of the study. 1.8, definition of terms. 1.9 is organization of the study. So now we'll go quickly to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is made up of chapter 2 is made up of the following. Now, chapter 2 is written boldly in capital letter at the center of the page. Under it, you have literature review. Okay, immediately after the literature review, you write 2.1, which is conceptual framework. Now, conceptual framework contains all the concepts. Okay, all the key concepts in the research topic. Now, after the conceptualization, the next thing is the empirical framework or empirical review. Now, the empirical review is to take all the things you have under the objectives of the study, you turn them to topics, and then write them as headings, subheadings under the empirical review, and then you review a literature in line with that. Let me be quick to add that empirical review is not just like literature review. It's not just like summarize the views of each scholars. No, that is not what is done. Now, you look at the theory used, you look at the methodology used, you look at the findings. Okay, that is what is obtainable under the empirical review. Now, what is the theory, what is the methodology used, and what is the finding from from the works of other scholars you are reviewing here. That is actually how to do empirical review. Then the third thing under literature review is theoretical framework or theoretical review. Now, under this, you have to review like 2 or 3 theories, and then you adopt the third one that you are going to do, which is the last one. So one has to be adopted, as your theoretical framework in the study. Then the next thing under the literature review is gaps, summary of gaps in literature. Summary of gaps in literature has to be written clearly, but has to be written clearly. So 2.1, so a very quick summary of what I've done or what we are doing under chapter 2. 2.1 is conceptual framework. 2.2, okay, is empirical framework. 2.3 is theoretical framework or theoretical review. 2.4 is summary of gaps in literature. Let's quickly go to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is research methodology. Now, under the research methodology, now this is how it is written. Now, in chapter 3, research methodology is written in capital letters and centralized at the center of the page with, then 3.1 is research design. So you can adopt any research design. Could be survey research design, case study research design, experimental research design. Any one you want to adopt, make sure that you write it clearly, and boldly, so that once your examiner sees it or your reader sees it, he would know exactly what you are talking about. That is 3.1. 3.2 is population of the study, sample size, and sampling technique. Now, under the population of the study, for easy understanding, you can actually make a table there. You put institutions, you put the population, the number of population, the number of staff. So each of these institutions must have a number of staff that you are using as your population. Eventually, you're going to have the total of the entire population, which makes the population of the study. Now, we also have the sample size. The sample size under the 3.2, the sample size there is actually looking at, the sample you are drawing from the entire population. So it is actually very important that you use a formula to arrive at your sample. If it is Taro-Yamane formula, if it is Wharner formula, there are so many formulas that you can actually use to arrive at your sample size. Then we have sampling technique. Now there are so many sampling technique. Now you can use probability sampling technique or non-probability. Under the probability, you can use random sampling, and stuff. Under the non-probability, you can use judgmental sampling, and stuff like that. So that is for 3.2. Don't forget that you can break it down to 3.2.1, which is population study, 3.2.2, which is sample size, 3.2.3, which is sampling technique. Now, 3.3 is research, is a method of data collection. Now, under the method of data collection, you can write clearly the method you are using to collect data. If you are using both primary and secondary, then you have to tell the reader, you have to write it clearly that, of course, the primary method of data collection will be adopted, particularly, and you have to mention it. If it is interview and questionnaire you are using, then you have to make mention of that, questionnaire and interview. Then after that, if you are using observation and focus group discussion too, you have to mention all of that under the primary method of data collection. Then we also have the secondary method. The secondary method involves, the use of written sources like textbooks, journals, internet, and all of that. So if that is what you are using, then if you are using the both, you have to mention it clearly, okay, and the sources of your secondary data. Then 3.4 3.4 is a method of data analysis. A method of data analysis, you have to bring out the method or the technique that you are using for data analysis. If it is just simple percentage tables, simple percentages and tables that you are going to use, as well as content analysis for qualitative research, you can use that. If it's complex statistical process or approach you are using, like adoption of chi-square, regression analysis, t-test, and all of that, then for quantitative research, you have to actually talk about that. So if it's a non calculation method or mathematical method, it is uh, it is qualitative. If it is calculation method, it is quantitative. So that is 3.4. Then 3.5 is justification for the method you are using. You have to justify it, the method you're using. So very quickly, let me summarize the chapter 3 that I talked about. Like I said, boldly you have to write chapter 3, in capital letters. Now after that, it has to be at the center of the page. Directly under that, you have research methodology. Okay, then you come down to 3.1, research design. 3.2, population, sample size, and sampling technique. Then 3.3 is method of data collection. 3.4, is a method of data analysis. 3.5 is justification for the methods. Okay, now let us go to chapter 4 very quickly. Chapter 4, the topic of chapter 4, or the title of chapter 4, is data presentation and analysis. Now 3.4.1 is data presentation. Okay, under the data presentation, you have under the data presentation, for easy understanding of your chapter 4, you have to create a table. Under the table 4.1, you have to create a table explaining the data, the questionnaire distributed, questionnaire retrieved, and not retrieved. Now by so doing, it will give you a bearing on the number of questionnaire that you are going to use to analyze your data. Okay, now the next table, which is table 4.1, will be sex of respondents. 4.2 will be academic qualification of respondent. Table 4.4, for example, will be the marital status of respondents. Okay, after that, the next thing that will happen is analysis of the questionnaire retrieved. Okay, then you begin to create table for each of the questions in the questionnaire. So if you have 20 questions, you are going to actually have 20 tables, and each of these tables you have to properly um, properly um, properly label it so that whoever reads it will be able to understand. Then the last thing, that is 4.2, will be discussion of findings. Now, the discussion of findings will be done based on objectives of the study or research propositions or hypotheses. So, for each objective, there is a finding. Okay, for each objective, there's a finding. So, if you have 4 objectives, you are going to have 4 broad findings. Okay, so so those are the things. So majorly in chapter 4 is data presentation and analysis, and it is written boldly, capital letter, at the middle or at the center of the page. Now directly under it, which is after you have written chapter 4, is data presentation and analysis. After that, 4.1 is data presentation. 4.2 is discussion of findings. Then in chapter 5, now chapter 5 is written at the middle of the page, or at the center of the page, at the center of the page. Okay, you have to centralize it up, and it is summary, conclusion, and recommendations. Now, 5.1 is 5.1 is summary. Okay, it has to be the summary of findings that you did under the discussion of findings. It has to be summary of findings. So the findings that you got from the research you have carried out, you have to bring it out under the summary of findings. Then 5.2 is conclusion. Now, the conclusion is just like a brief summary of everything you have in your work. Then the recommendations will have to be in line with the objectives. Okay, in line with the objectives and the propositions. So that is actually, for chapter 5. A quick recap is chapter 5 is, summary, conclusion, and recommendations. 5.1 summary, 5.2 conclusion, 5.3 recommendations. Now, the appendix of the work starts with references. After the references, then the next one is, if it is interview guide that you have, or questionnaire guide that you have, you put it under the appendix 2. So that is actually the long and short of the intricacies of writing a research project